6 a.m. sharp. The doorbell rings through my first night in Uncle Ray's cabin. I haven't even touched my coffee. A platinum blonde woman shoves past me, slaps a stack of papers on the table, and announces she's Andrea Murphy, HOA president for 12 years running. Her demand sign over my newly inherited snowboard resort to her son. Right now, 48 hours to pack my things, or she'll make my life a living hell. Her exact words, in Alpine Vista, I am the law, my resort. The one Uncle Ray built from nothing. The place where kids from broken homes learn that mountains don't care if you're rich or poor. The last thing he asked me to protect, the woman threatening me. She has no idea she's standing in the home of Summit County's sheriff. The doorbell screamed through Uncle Ray's cabin at 6 in the morning. I stood barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, still wearing his old flannel shirt, running on 2 hours of sleep since the funeral. I expected a neighbor with condolences, maybe the property lawyer with forgotten paperwork. What I got was a 5'6" hurricane in a cashmere coat, pushing past me before I could say hello. I'm Andrea Murphy, president of Alpine Vista Homeowners Association. 12 years. She didn't wait for an invitation. She didn't acknowledge the framed photo of Uncle Ray on the mantel, still surrounded by funeral flowers. She walked straight to my kitchen table, dropped a leather folder, and flipped it open to reveal a stack of legal-looking documents. Her perfume was expensive. Her attitude was poison. I'm very sorry about Ray, truly, but let's not pretend this changes anything. Your uncle made a promise to sell this resort to my son. Brandon, this is the contract. Sign it, and I'll give you 72 hours to clear out. She tapped her manicured nails impatiently on the table. That's generous, considering the circumstances. I glanced at the top page while she spoke. The header read, Summit County Land Transfer Agreement, but the filing reference format was wrong. County documents use a 7-digit code. This one had 5. Either her lawyer was incompetent, or these papers were designed to intimidate someone who wouldn't know the difference. I kept my face neutral. I need time to review this with my lawyer. The will hasn't even been fully processed. Andrea's smile vanished. Her eyes went cold in a way that told me this woman was not used to hearing anything except yes. She leaned forward, palms flat on the table, invading my space. Let me explain how things work here. Sweetheart, this is my community. Your uncle refused to sell, and I made his last years very difficult. Code violations, noise complaints, legal fees. You want to inherit that fight? She paused, letting the threat settle. Or you can sign this paper, take a generous check, and go back to wherever you came from. In Alpine Vista, I am the law. Remember that. I said nothing. I let her talk. Every word she spoke was another nail in her own coffin, and she mistook my silence for weakness. She straightened up, smoothed her coat, and headed for the door like the conversation was already over, like I had surrendered. She walked right past the coat rack by the entrance, right past my jacket on the hook, right past the bronze badge clipped to my belt, gleaming under the morning light. She didn't see it. She was too busy feeling victorious. The door slammed behind her, and the cabin fell silent. I walked over to the coat rack and unclipped my badge. Summit County Sheriff, elected 8 months ago, youngest in the county's history, first woman to hold the position. This self-appointed queen of a homeowners association had just barged into my home, threatened me, admitted to harassing my dying uncle, and declared herself above the law, all before I'd had my first sip of coffee. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just flash the badge and watch her face melt? Here's something Uncle Ray taught me when I was 12, learning to snowboard on this very mountain. Emma, never interrupt someone when they're busy tying their own noose. Andrea Murphy just handed me a confession on a silver platter. In my line of work, every word can become evidence. So I let her walk out thinking she'd won. The best traps are the ones your prey builds for themselves. The cabin was quiet now, but my mind was already moving. Andrea Murphy had revealed too much. Her arrogance made her careless, and careless people always leave trails. I picked up my phone and dialed Deputy Christian Hill. He answered on the second ring, voice groggy. Boss, it's 6 in the morning. Everything okay? I looked at the fraudulent documents on my table, then at Uncle Ray's photo on the mantel, then at the badge resting in my palm. Christian, I need you to bring a body camera to the cabin and pull everything you can find on an Andrea Murphy, HOA president, Alpine Vista Estates. A pause. Are we investigating something? I smiled for the first time since the funeral. We might be. Get here by noon and bring coffee, the good kind. I hung up and finally reached for my mug. It had gone cold. That was fine. Things were about to heat up soon. The summer I turned 12, my mother sent me to Colorado because she couldn't look at me without crying. Dad had just died in the line of duty, shot during a routine traffic stop in Houston. Everyone said I had his eyes. So, she shipped me off to her brother, Ray, a man I barely knew, who lived alone on a mountain and ran a snowboard resort that barely broke even. I hated everything about that summer. Until Uncle Ray put me on a board and pushed me down the slope. I fell more times than I could count, but when I finally made it to the bottom without falling, Uncle Ray was waiting. No praise, no celebration, just a nod and 5 words. Mountains don't care about money. Mountains only care if you're brave enough to try. That was the day Pinecrest Peak became home. Now, I walked through the resort he built from nothing, trying to see it through his eyes one last time. The main lodge still smelled like pine and old coffee. The walls were covered with photographs spanning 3 decades. Kids in borrowed gear, families who couldn't afford vacations anywhere else, teenagers who arrived angry and left transformed. In his office, I found a box labeled Letters, hundreds of handwritten thank you notes. I didn't read them all. I couldn't, but one stopped me cold. A single mother from Denver wrote that her son had been suicidal before attending Pinecrest Peak's youth program. After one summer here, he found a reason to live. She credited Uncle Ray with saving his life. I set the letter down because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Beneath the box was his handwritten will, not the official one filed with the lawyer, a personal note, folded and worn, addressed to me. Emma, you're the only one who understands that this place isn't about real estate. It's about second chances. Don't ever sell it to people who only see dollar signs. Keep it alive. Love, Uncle Ray. I pressed the note against my chest and let myself cry for the first time since the funeral. $4.5 million worth of property, prime mountain real estate, to Andrea Murphy. It was just an asset. To me, it was the last piece of my uncle still breathing. A knock interrupted my grief. I wiped my face and opened the door to find an elderly woman holding a casserole dish, her eyes kind but guarded. I'm Helen Kowalski, lived next door to Ray for 23 years. You must be Emma. I invited her in. Helen didn't waste time with small talk. She set the casserole on the counter and turned to face me. I heard Andrea Murphy visited you this morning. News travels fast. I nodded. She wants me to sell. Helen laughed bitterly. She's been trying for 5 years. Ray refused every time. What Helen told me next made my blood run cold, not the tactics. I already knew Andrea weaponized the HOA. What I didn't know were the casualties. The Hendersons, a retired couple, lost their entire savings fighting fabricated violations in court. They moved to Arizona, broken. The Chens sold their dream home at 40% below market value just to escape. A young family named Torres gave up after Andrea reported them to Child Protective Services over a fence dispute. The investigation found nothing, but they couldn't bear the humiliation. 3 families destroyed, 3 homes absorbed into Andrea's sphere of influence at bargain prices. And Ray had been fighting her alone for half a decade, spending his final years in legal battles instead of peace. Helen squeezed my hand before leaving. Your uncle never gave up. Don't you give up either. I promised her I wouldn't. After she was gone, I stood alone in the cabin, staring at Uncle Ray's photograph. 15 years I stayed away. 15 years he fought alone. I swore an oath to protect the vulnerable and uphold the law, but I couldn't protect my own family. That ends now. Whatever Andrea Murphy throws at me, I will be ready. And when she finally realizes who she's been threatening, it will be far too late. The next morning, my lawyer confirmed what I suspected. Uncle Ray's will was airtight, 100% legal, no agreement with the Murphy family, no promise to sell. Andrea had lied about everything, which meant every threat she made was built on fraud. And fraud, in my experience, is just the beginning. People who lie that boldly always have more to hide. I intended to find every single secret. The first violation notice arrived 3 days after Andrea's visit, hand-delivered by a man in a polo shirt who wouldn't make eye contact. The envelope contained a single page with the HOA letterhead and a photograph of my resort's entrance sign. The charge incorrect font, according to the notice. Pinecrest Peak's sign used a typeface not approved by the Alpine Vista Design Standards Committee. The fine was $500. Payment is due within 24 hours. I checked the resort's records. That sign had been standing for 28 years. No one had ever complained. I photographed the notice, logged the timestamp, and filed it away. This was just the beginning. 2 days later, another envelope. This time, the parking lot was the problem. The spaces were allegedly 2 inches narrower than HOA specifications. Fine $750, due in 24 hours. I measured them myself. They met the county code exactly, which supersedes any HOA guideline. But Andrea wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in pressure. A third notice followed the next morning. Wrong paint color. Another $1,000. Same impossible deadline. 3 violations in 1 week. $2,250 in manufactured fines. All targeting a property that had operated without incident for 3 decades. That evening, I read the Alpine Vista bylaws cover to cover. 47 pages of regulations in fine print. 2 sections told me everything I needed to know. Section 12 required majority board approval before any violation notice could be issued. Section 15 mandated a 30-day response period for non-emergency infractions. Andrea had ignored both. Every notice she sent was unilateral, unauthorized, with fraudulent deadlines. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was manufacturing leverage. I documented everything: photographs, timestamps, cross-references. If this ever reached a courtroom, I wanted an airtight record. Then came the emergency meeting notice, slipped under my door at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, 48 hours to convene. The sole agenda item, a resolution declaring Pinecrest Peak Resort a public nuisance, demanding immediate sale or closure. I read it twice, then I smiled. Andrea Murphy was bringing this fight into the open. She still didn't know who she was fighting. The community center was packed. 32 residents filled the folding chairs, double the usual attendance. Word had spread. People wanted to see blood. Andrea stood at the front podium in a cream blazer and pearls, every bit the benevolent leader. She had prepared a slideshow, photographs of Pinecrest Peak, charts showing alleged noise levels, graphs claiming decreased property values, all fabricated, all designed to terrify homeowners into compliance. "This resort," she announced, her voice dripping false concern, "represents a clear danger to our community's investment. I move that we pass a resolution requiring the current owner to sell or cease operations immediately." Silence. I watched the faces around me. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked scared. A few glanced at the exits. 12 years of Andrea's reign had taught them that resistance meant becoming a target. So, they sat frozen, ready to rubber stamp whatever she demanded. That's when I stood up, full uniform, badge polished. The room turned. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Andrea's eyes narrowed. She didn't recognize me at first. Then she did. Her face went white. "I'm Sheriff Emma Dawson," my voice carried across the room without effort. "I'm also the legal owner of Pinecrest Peak Resort, and I'm here to inform this board that any resolution passed tonight in violation of Colorado revised statutes will trigger a formal criminal investigation." The silence stretched. Andrea gripped the podium like it was the only thing holding her upright. You're the sheriff." I didn't blink. "I am. And I have documented evidence that every violation notice issued against my property was unauthorized by this board, in direct violation of your own bylaws. That's not enforcement, Mrs. Murphy. Under state law, that's criminal harassment. Most people don't understand HOAs. They're not the government. They're private organizations with limited power. They can fine you, but only if they follow their own rules." Andrea skipped the board vote. She ignored mandatory response periods. She invented deadlines. That's not community protection. That's weaponized bureaucracy. And now she knows her target isn't some outsider she can bully into silence. Her target enforces the actual law. Andrea recovered faster than I expected. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure Sheriff Dawson is simply confused about proper procedures. We can discuss this privately after the meeting." But the damage was done. Residents were whispering, looking at her differently. The spell of her invincibility had cracked. I nodded politely and walked out, leaving her to salvage what remained of her authority. Outside, the mountain air was cold and sharp. I breathed it in and checked my phone. One message from Deputy Christian Hill. "Background check complete. You need to see this." I typed back, "Tomorrow." Whatever Andrea did next, I would be ready. And based on the desperation in her eyes, I knew she wouldn't stop. People like her never do. They escalate until they destroy themselves. The question wasn't whether she would make another move. The question was how far she would go. I had a feeling I was about to find out. 2 a.m. My phone exploded with dispatch. I grabbed it before the second ring. "Sheriff Dawson, an anonymous caller reported an armed individual at Pinecrest Peak Resort. Female suspect threatening violence, possibly intoxicated, waving a firearm." I froze. Pinecrest Peak, my home. The caller was describing me. "Who's responding?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Deputy Hill, ETA 4 minutes. I told her I would meet him there and hung up. Someone had just tried to weaponize my own department against me. Christian's cruiser pulled up 3 minutes later, lights off, and approached cautiously. He stepped out with his hand near his holster, protocol for an armed suspect call. When he saw me standing on the porch in sweatpants, unarmed and calm, he exhaled hard. "Boss, what the hell?" I gestured for him to come inside. "Swatting." His face shifted from confusion to cold anger. He understood immediately. People have died from these hoaxes. Innocent people shot by officers responding to fabricated threats. Whoever made that call wasn't trying to harass me. They were trying to get me killed. We worked fast. Christian pulled the dispatch recording while I accessed the security cameras. The audio was grainy but usable. Female voice, educated accent, performing panic but missing the emotional beats. The caller claimed to be a neighbor witnessing the incident in real time. My security footage showed no vehicles, no movement, no human presence within a mile of the cabin. Whoever made that report was nowhere near Pinecrest Peak. Christian ran the originating phone number through the carrier database. The registration came back in under 2 minutes. Brandon Murphy, Andrea's son, the same Brandon who supposedly needed my resort for his business, the same Brandon whose mother I had humiliated at her own HOA meeting 48 hours earlier. I let the implications settle. This wasn't harassment anymore. Swatting crosses into federal territory. 18 U.S.D. Section 138. False information and hoaxes, up to 5 years in federal prison. If I could prove Andrea orchestrated it, she would go down with him. Christian was practically vibrating. "Boss, we have enough. Phone registration, security footage, timeline. We can call the FBI right now." He was right. We had probable cause. We had evidence. We could end this tonight. But I thought about Andrea's face at the HOA meeting. The shock when she realized who I was. The way she recovered, smiled, tried to spin. She wasn't beaten. She was regrouping. If I moved now with a single incident, her lawyers would argue Brandon panicked after his mother was publicly confronted by a sheriff with a personal grudge. Reasonable doubt, the case weakened. But if I let them escalate, if I documented every desperate move, they would build their own prison. Pattern of harassment, exposed finances, multiple witnesses. No lawyer saves anyone from that. I know some of you want me to make the arrest right now. 8 years in law enforcement taught me that patience isn't weakness. It's a strategy. Andrea has money and connections. One swatting call gives her lawyers room to maneuver. A documented pattern of coordinated crimes leaves no escape route. Sometimes justice means letting your enemy believe they're winning just long enough to seal their own fate. Quick pause here. Emma has solid evidence. She could call the FBI tonight. Andrea and Brandon face immediate consequences. Done. But she's choosing to wait. More risk. Potentially more justice. If you were in her position, what would you do? Move now, or let them dig deeper? Drop your answer in the comments. Now, back to it. We document everything, I told Christian. We build the file, but we don't move yet. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he trusted my judgment. And if they escalate further, I met his eyes. Then they face more charges. Andrea Murphy is going down either way. The only question is how many years she takes with her. He nodded slowly. Next step. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to District Attorney Robert Quinn. copying the FBI field office in Denver, a formal notice that we were monitoring a potential federal case. When the time came to move, everyone would be ready. I hit send at 3:47 in the morning. The mountain was silent. Somewhere in Alpine Vista, Andrea Murphy was probably sleeping peacefully, believing her swatting attempt had simply failed. She had no idea every move she made was being recorded, analyzed, and filed. What started as HOA harassment had crossed into federal crime territory, filing false reports, conspiracy, potentially attempted murder by cop. The stakes had multiplied overnight. I lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. Andrea wasn't finished. I could feel it. People like her don't retreat when cornered. They attack harder. They make bigger mistakes. The question wasn't whether she would cross more lines. It was how far she would go before I closed the trap around her completely. The next 2 weeks became a masterclass in building an unbreakable case. I've prosecuted drug dealers, domestic abusers, and white-collar criminals. I've testified in federal court and watched defense attorneys try to dismantle my evidence piece by piece. I know what survives cross-examination and what crumbles under pressure. Andrea Murphy thought she was fighting a grieving niece who inherited property she didn't deserve. She was about to learn she had picked a war with someone who builds cases for a living. Step 1 was the subpoena. As sheriff, I had the authority to request HOA records as part of an active harassment investigation. I drafted the paperwork myself, had it reviewed by the county attorney, and served it to the Alpine Vista HOA board the same afternoon. The request was specific. All meeting minutes from the past 5 years, all violation notices issued during that period, all correspondence between board members regarding enforcement actions. The current board members, terrified of being caught in Andrea's crossfire, cooperated immediately. 2 days later, Christian and I sat in my office surrounded by banker boxes filled with documents. What we found was worse than I expected. 47 violation notices had been issued under Andrea Murphy's presidency in the past 3 years alone. I cross-referenced each one against the meeting minutes. Not a single notice had received board approval before issuance. Andrea had been operating unilaterally, using the HOA letterhead as her personal weapon. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the pattern. Every single violation targeted properties that Andrea or her associates later acquired at below-market prices. The Hendersons received 11 violations over 8 months before selling their home to a company called Mountain Vista LLC. The Chens faced 9 violations and 2 frivolous lawsuits before surrendering their property to the same entity. The Torres family endured a Child Protective Services investigation triggered by an anonymous complaint, traced back to an email server owned by Alpine Vista HOA. They sold within 60 days. Mountain Vista LLC was registered to a single managing member, Andrea Murphy. I spread the documents across my desk and let Christian absorb the scope of what we were seeing. She wasn't just harassing people, he said quietly. She was running a property acquisition scheme. I nodded. 12 families in 3 years, she'd manufacture violations, bury them in fines and legal fees, then swoop in with a lowball offer when they couldn't fight anymore. Once they sold, the violations magically disappeared. Christian shook his head. That's not just harassment, that's fraud. Wire fraud if any of these transactions crossed state lines. I picked up the phone, which is why we need federal help. The FBI field office in Denver assigned Special Agent Maria Santos to our case. She arrived 2 days later with a forensic accountant and a warrant for Brandon Murphy's financial records. What they uncovered explained everything. Brandon Murphy owed $2.3 million to an online gambling operation based in Costa Rica. He had been bleeding money for years, hiding the debt from his social circle, financing his lifestyle with credit cards and private loans. 6 months ago, the debt collectors started making threats. That's when Andrea began her aggressive push to acquire Pinecrest Peak. The resort was worth $4.5 million on the open market, enough to clear Brandon's debt and leave them with a comfortable cushion. Uncle Ray's refusal to sell wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a financial death sentence for her son. Agent Santos pulled Andrea's personal finances next. The picture grew darker. Andrea had already mortgaged her Alpine Vista mansion to cover part of Brandon's debt. She was 3 months behind on property taxes. Her credit cards were maxed. The woman who presented herself as the queen of the community was drowning in secret debt. desperately trying to maintain appearances while her financial world collapsed. Pinecrest Peak wasn't a business opportunity. It was a lifeline. And when Uncle Ray died, Andrea saw her chance. A grieving niece from Texas, unfamiliar with Colorado law, isolated and vulnerable, easy prey. She never imagined that easy prey would turn out to be the county sheriff with federal contacts and a personal vendetta backed by evidence. The witness statements came next. Helen Kowalski was the first to sign an affidavit. She detailed every interaction she had witnessed between Andrea and Uncle Ray over 5 years. The threatening letters, the fabricated complaints, the isolation tactics were designed to wear him down. 5 other former residents agreed to testify. The Hendersons flew back from Arizona to give depositions. The Chens provided email records showing Andrea's harassment campaign in their own words. The Torres family submitted the CPS complaint that nearly destroyed their lives, along with the investigators' report clearing them of all allegations. 6 families, 6 nearly identical stories, a pattern so consistent that no jury could dismiss it as a coincidence. Digital evidence sealed the case. The FBI's forensic team extracted metadata from every email Andrea had sent to my uncle, to me, and to the other victims. They recovered deleted text messages between Andrea and Brandon, planning their approach to force the sale. One exchange, dated 2 days before the swatting incident, read, "She won't sell. We need to scare her out." Brandon's response, "I have an idea. Trust me." They recovered location data from Brandon's phone showing he was parked half a mile from my cabin at 1:53 in the morning on the night of the fake 911 call. The same phone was used to make that call. The same phone is registered in his name. There was no ambiguity, no reasonable doubt, just evidence, stacked layer upon layer, forming an inescapable prison of their own making. 3 weeks after the swatting attempt, my phone rang. District Attorney Robert Quinn. "Sheriff Dawson, I've reviewed everything. The state charges are solid, harassment, filing false police reports, and fraud. But I've been talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They want this case." I felt my pulse quicken. Federal charges, Quinn's voice carried a grim satisfaction. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, attempted extortion, making false statements to federal investigators. Since Andrea lied during her initial interview with Agent Santos, they're convening a grand jury next week. But here's the thing. They want to coordinate with us on the arrest. Make it public. Send a message. I understood immediately. A quiet arrest would let Andrea control the narrative. A public arrest would shatter her reputation permanently. Where and when? Quinn paused. The monthly HOA meeting, 3 days from now. We serve the warrant in front of everyone she's terrorized for 12 years. Andrea Murphy stood on the 18th green of the Alpine Vista Country Club when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. An email from her attorney, marked urgent. She opened it while her golf partners waited impatiently. DA's office issued formal subpoenas. FBI involved. Do not speak to anyone. Call me immediately. The phone slipped from her fingers. She caught it before it hit the grass, but her hands were trembling now. The women around her noticed. They exchanged glances, whispers. Andrea forced a smile, excused herself, and walked toward the clubhouse on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. For the first time in 12 years, she didn't know what to do next. The walls were closing in, and she couldn't see a way out. I received the arrest warrant from Judge Foster at 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. I held the document in my hands and read every word twice. Andrea, Patricia Murphy, Brandon Thomas Murphy, multiple felony counts, state and federal charges pending. The judge had approved our request to execute the warrant at the upcoming HOA meeting. Maximum public impact, maximum accountability. I called Christian into my office and handed him the warrant. He read it in silence, then looked up at me. "We're really doing this." I nodded. "Thursday night, 7 p.m., full uniforms. I want 2 additional officers as backup and an FBI agent present for the federal counts." Christian grinned for the first time since this whole mess started. "Boss, I've been waiting for this moment since you showed me those violation notices." I understood the feeling, but I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about personal satisfaction. It was about justice. For Uncle Ray, for Helen, for the Hendersons and the Chens and the Torres family, for everyone. Andrea Murphy had crushed under her designer heels while playing queen of a community she had terrorized into submission. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the next 2 days reviewing every detail of the case, rehearsing the arrest procedure, and coordinating with the FBI and the DA's office. Everything had to be perfect. Andrea would have expensive lawyers. She would fight every charge. She would try to spin this as a vendetta, a corrupt sheriff abusing her power. The evidence had to be overwhelming. The procedure had to be flawless. And when I walked into that community center and placed her in handcuffs, every single person watching needed to understand that this was justice. Pure, procedural, undeniable justice. No theatrics, no gloating, just the law, applied equally. To someone who believed she was above it, the trap was set. All that remained was for Andrea Murphy to walk into it. Andrea Murphy didn't know the walls were closing in, but she could feel something shifting, the subpoenas. The FBI agent is asking questions around town, the way her fellow board members suddenly stopped returning her calls. So, she did what cornered animals do. She attacked. The smear campaign was launched 48 hours before the scheduled HOA meeting. Anonymous posts flooded the neighborhood forums. Concerned citizen accounts warned residents about a corrupt sheriff using her badge to intimidate a respected community leader. Screenshots of fabricated text messages circulated, allegedly showing me threatening Andrea's family. A petition demanding my removal from office appeared overnight with 200 signatures, most from accounts created within the same hour. Then came the media play. Jake Brown, a local reporter who covered county politics, received an anonymous tip about a major corruption scandal involving the Summit County Sheriff's Office. To his credit, Jake did his due diligence. He called me directly before running anything. "Sheriff Dawson, I received documents alleging you've been harassing Andrea Murphy and abusing your position to seize her family's assets. Care to comment?" I kept my voice even. "I don't comment on active investigations, but I'd encourage you to pull the public records from the county clerk's office. HOA violation notices, property transfer documents, and court filings. Everything you need is there." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Are you saying there's a different story here?" I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "I'm saying the truth is in the documents. You're a journalist. Find it." Jake spent the next 24 hours digging. What he found wasn't a corrupt sheriff. It was a 12-year pattern of HOA abuse, forced property sales, and financial manipulation by the woman who had tried to make him her mouthpiece. He called Andrea for comment. She hung up on him. He called me back. "Sheriff, I owe you an apology. I almost ran a hit piece based on fabricated evidence." I told him no apology was necessary. "Just report the truth when the time comes. That's all I ask." He promised he would. Andrea's media strategy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of an ally, she had created a witness to her desperation. But the real collapse came from inside her own family. Brandon Murphy had spent 3 weeks watching the investigation tighten around him. The FBI had frozen his accounts. His gambling creditors were making threats. His mother's lawyers were billing hours she couldn't afford. And the federal prosecutor had made clear that conspiracy charges meant he would face the same sentence as Andrea, possibly more, given the swatting incident. He was 29 years old, staring at a decade in federal prison, all because his mother couldn't accept that a dying man refused to sell his property. The math finally broke him. DA Quinn called me at 6:14 p.m. on Wednesday evening. "Brandon Murphy just walked into my office with his attorney. He wants to cooperate." I sat down slowly. "What's he offering?" Quinn's voice carried barely contained satisfaction. "Everything. Text messages planning the harassment campaign, emails discussing how to pressure your uncle before he died, recordings of Andrea instructing him to make the swatting call. He's giving us the whole conspiracy on a silver platter." I closed my eyes. Uncle Ray's face flashed through my mind. All those years fighting alone, all those letters I never answered. "Does Andrea know?" Quinn almost laughed. "Not a clue. She thinks Brandon is meeting with a bankruptcy attorney right now. She'll find out tomorrow night when we arrest her and her own son testifies against her." The trap wasn't just set anymore. It was sealed from the inside. Christian stood in front of the evidence board we had built in my office. Red strings connected Andrea to 47 fabricated violations. Blue strings linked her to 12 forced property sales. Yellow strings traced the money flowing through Mountain Vista LLC. Green strings mapped the conspiracy with Brandon, from the initial harassment to the swatting call. "I've worked cases for 6 years," he said quietly. "Drug busts, domestic situations, bar fights that turned ugly." He shook his head slowly. "I've never seen someone build an empire of cruelty this methodically. She didn't just break laws, she turned the whole system into a weapon." He looked at me. "Tomorrow night, we dismantle everything she built, in front of everyone. She terrorized." I nodded. "That's the plan." Christian's jaw tightened. "Good. She deserves to fall exactly where she ruled." The night before the arrest, I sat alone in Uncle Ray's cabin. No television, no phone, just the wind outside and his photograph on the mantel. The same photograph Andrea had ignored when she barged in demanding I sign away his legacy. Tomorrow, I will walk into the Alpine Vista Community Center in full uniform. I would interrupt her meeting, serve the warrant, and place her in handcuffs in front of every person she had bullied, threatened, and destroyed over 12 years. It wouldn't bring Uncle Ray back. It wouldn't erase the guilt I carried for staying away so long, but it would mean something. Justice, accountability, proof that no one, no matter how powerful they believe themselves to be, stands above the law. I looked at his picture one last time. Tomorrow, I finish this, I promise. Then I turned off the lights and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would be the longest day of my life. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of cold clarity that only mountain air can deliver. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 6:15, adjusting my uniform for the third time, badge polished, name tag straight, belt perfectly aligned. In 45 minutes, I would arrest Andrea Murphy in front of the community she had terrorized for 12 years. Every detail mattered. Every gesture would be scrutinized. Every word I spoke would be replayed in courtrooms and news reports for months to come. I took one final breath, looked myself in the eyes, and walked out the door. Uncle Ray's photograph watched me leave. I could almost feel him nodding. The Alpine Vista Community Center parking lot was overflowing when I arrived. Christian had texted me 20 minutes earlier. "Standing room only, word got out." I wasn't surprised. Secrets don't survive long in small communities. Someone on the HOA board had talked. Someone always talks. By the time I pulled in, there were easily 60 cars crammed into a lot designed for 40. Residents clustered in small groups outside the entrance, speaking in hushed tones, glancing around nervously. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. I parked my cruiser at the far end of the lot, out of immediate sight lines. Christian's vehicle was already in position near the side exit. 2 additional deputies waited in an unmarked car by the main road. FBI agent Santos sat in a black SUV near the community center's rear entrance. Every exit covered. Every contingency is planned. Andrea Murphy had nowhere to run. I waited until 7 o'clock. Let the meeting start. Let Andrea settle into her throne. Let her believe, for a few more minutes, that she still controlled this room. Then I stepped out of my cruiser and walked toward the entrance. The crowd parted without a word. 60 pairs of eyes tracked my uniform, my badge, my expression. No one asked questions. No one needed to. The glass doors of the community center swung open, and I stepped into the fluorescent-lit hall where Andrea Murphy was mid-sentence, gesturing at a projection screen filled with charts and graphs. She didn't notice me at first. She was too busy performing. "As I was saying," Andrea announced to the packed room, her voice carrying that practiced authority I had come to despise. "The declining property values in Section C are directly attributable to certain elements that refuse to comply with community standards. Tonight, I'm proposing a resolution to address these concerns decisively." She clicked to the next slide. A photograph of Pinecrest Peak Resort filled the screen. My resort. Uncle Ray's legacy. The room shifted uncomfortably. A few residents glanced toward the back, where I now stood in full uniform, flanked by Christian and Deputy Martinez. Andrea still hadn't looked up. She was too focused on her script. "This property has been a source of complaints for years. Noise, traffic, environmental concerns. It's time we took action to protect our investment and our quality of life." I let her finish the sentence. Then I started walking. My boots echoed on the linoleum floor. The room fell absolutely silent. Andrea finally looked up. annoyance flickering across her face at the interruption. Then she saw my uniform. Then she saw my badge. Then she saw Christian and Martinez moving to flank the exits. Her face went pale, not white, pale, like someone watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing impact was inevitable but unable to look away. "Sheriff Dawson," she managed, her voice losing its practiced smoothness. "This is a private meeting. You can't just—" I stopped 10 feet from the podium and let my voice carry without raising it. "Andrea Patricia Murphy, I have a warrant for your arrest." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ripples of whispered shock spread through the audience. Andrea gripped at the podium with both hands, knuckles whitening. "This is absurd. On what possible charges?" I didn't blink. "Filing false police reports, criminal harassment, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, attempted extortion. Additional federal charges are pending." I pulled the warrant from my jacket and held it up for the room to see. This warrant was issued by Judge Marianne Foster and co-signed by the United States Attorney for the District of Colorado. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Andrea's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in 12 years, the Queen of Alpine Vista had nothing to say. The side door opened. Brandon Murphy walked in, followed by District Attorney Robert Quinn. Andrea's head snapped toward her son, confusion mixing with the fear already swimming in her eyes. "Brandon, what are you doing here? Why are you with—" She stopped. She saw the look on his face, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes, the way he positioned himself next to the prosecutor instead of rushing to her defense. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. "No," she whispered. "Brandon, no. Tell me you didn't." Brandon's voice was flat, hollow. "I'm sorry, Mom. I couldn't go to prison for you." He finally looked at her, and there was nothing in his expression but exhaustion. "I told them everything." D.A. Quinn stepped forward, addressing the room with the calm authority of someone who had done this many times before. "For the record, Brandon Murphy has agreed to cooperate fully with state and federal investigators. His testimony, along with documentary evidence, text messages, and financial records, has established a clear pattern of criminal conduct spanning multiple years." He nodded toward me. "Sheriff Dawson." I approached Andrea with the handcuffs. She tried to back away, but the podium blocked her retreat. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice cracking. "I built this community. I protected these people. Everything I did was for them." I took her wrist, gently but firmly, and secured the first cuff. "You terrorized 12 families into selling their homes below market value. You fabricated violations to crush anyone who opposed you. You tried to have me killed with a fake 911 call." The second cuff clicked into place. "That's not protection. Mrs. Murphy, that's racketeering." The walk from the podium to the exit was 47 steps. I counted everyone. Andrea Murphy, the woman who had ruled Alpine Vista with an iron fist, stumbled twice. Her designer heels caught on the linoleum she had probably selected herself. Her perfectly styled hair fell across her face as she ducked her head, trying to hide from 60 pairs of eyes that had once looked at her with fear. Now those eyes held something else: relief, satisfaction. A few people were already recording on their phones. Andrea's breathing came in short, shallow gasps. Her shoulders trembled beneath my hand. She tried to speak once, twice, but only managed a choked sound that might have been a sob or might have been rage. It didn't matter. The woman who had declared herself the law was now subject to it. And everyone in that room witnessed her fall. D.A. Quinn remained at the podium as I escorted Andrea toward the exit. His voice carried across the silent room. For the past 3 years, Andrea Murphy used her position as HOA president to systematically target homeowners, fabricate violations, and force property sales to a company she secretly controlled. 12 families lost their homes. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were extracted through fraudulent fines and legal intimidation. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Tonight, that ends. State and federal charges have been filed. A full accounting of every affected property will be conducted. Restitution will be pursued for all victims." The room erupted in murmurs. Some people cried, others embraced. A man I didn't recognize stood up and started applauding. Within seconds, The entire room joined him. The sound followed me out the door. A wave of catharsis 12 years in the making. Outside, the night air hit my face like absolution. Agent Santos waited by her SUV, ready to transport Andrea to federal holding. I handed off my prisoner with a nod. Andrea looked at me one last time, mascara streaking down her cheeks, and whispered, "You've ruined everything." I met her eyes without flinching. "No, Mrs. Murphy, you did that yourself. I just made sure there were consequences." Helen Kowalski found me in the parking lot after the SUV pulled away. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling, the kind of smile that takes years to earn. 12 years, she said, her voice thick with emotion. 12 years I watched her destroy people, good people, people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. She took my hand in both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. I lost friends to her, neighbors who gave up and moved away, broken. I thought she was untouchable. I thought she would die on that podium, still giving orders, still making everyone afraid. And tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile didn't waver. "Thank you, Emma. Not because you're the sheriff, because you did what was right when it would have been easier to walk away. Ray would be so proud." I squeezed her hand back and let myself feel, just for a moment, the weight of what we had accomplished. He's the one who taught me that mountains don't care about money. They only care if you're brave enough to try. Helen laughed through her tears. That sounds exactly like him. Christian approached as Helen walked back toward the community center, where residents were still processing what they had witnessed. "Boss," he said quietly, "Brandon's being processed separately. His cooperation deal is contingent on full testimony at trial. DA says we've got everything we need." I nodded, watching the last of the crowd filter out into the parking lot. "What about the other families, the ones Andrea forced out?" Christian pulled out his notebook. "Quinn's office is already reaching out. The Hendersons, the Chens, the Torres family, they'll have the chance to pursue civil restitution on top of the criminal case. Some of them might even get their homes back." The thought settled over me like a warm blanket. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration, making things right for the people who had been wronged. I stood alone in the parking lot long after everyone else had left. The community center lights flickered off. The mountain air grew colder, but I didn't move. I was thinking about Uncle Ray, about the summers he spent teaching me to fall and get back up, about the letter he left me, asking me to protect what he had built, about the years I stayed away, too busy with my own life to visit the man who had saved mine. I couldn't bring him back. I couldn't undo the years of loneliness he endured while fighting Andrea Murphy alone, but I could honor his memory. I could protect the resort he loved. And I could make sure that the woman who made his final years miserable would spend her own final years facing the consequences of her cruelty. Tomorrow, there would be paperwork, press conferences, legal proceedings that would stretch for months. But tonight, there was only this: the cold mountain air, the silent parking lot, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice, real justice, had finally been served. 3 months passed before the verdict came. 3 months of depositions, motions, and legal maneuvering that tested my patience in ways I hadn't anticipated. Andrea's lawyers tried everything. They argued entrapment. They claimed prosecutorial overreach. They accused me of using my badge to settle a personal vendetta. The judge dismissed every motion. The evidence was too overwhelming. The witnesses are too numerous. The paper trail is too meticulous. When the federal jury returned after just 4 hours of deliberation, I was sitting in the third row of the courtroom, wearing civilian clothes, trying to look like any other interested citizen. The foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Andrea Murphy received 4 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, plus 2 years of supervised probation upon release. State charges added 18 months to be served concurrently. The judge ordered restitution of $847,000 to the 12 families she had defrauded over the years. She was permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board in the state of Colorado. When the sentence was read, Andrea sat motionless at the defense table, staring straight ahead like a woman watching her entire world collapse in slow motion. She didn't cry, she didn't protest, she simply broke. The woman who had declared herself the law was now subject to its full weight, and there was nothing her money or her connections could do to save her. Brandon Murphy fared better, though not by much. His cooperation agreement spared him prison time, but the judge made clear that mercy came with conditions: 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory gambling addiction treatment, community service at a nonprofit that helped families displaced by predatory housing practices. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Brandon would spend the next year and a half helping people just like the ones his mother had destroyed. Whether that would change him remained to be seen, but at least he would have the chance to try. His mother wouldn't have that luxury. The transformation of Alpine Vista began almost immediately after Andrea's arrest. Helen Kowalski was elected HOA president by unanimous vote at an emergency meeting held 2 weeks after the trial concluded. Her first act was to propose a complete overhaul of the community's bylaws. The new regulations required unanimous board approval for any violation notice. They mandated a 60-day response period for all non-emergency infractions. They established an independent review committee for disputes, removing the president's ability to act unilaterally. Every single measure passed without opposition. 12 years of fear had ended. People were finally ready to build something better. The families Andrea had driven out began returning. The Hendersons used their restitution funds to repurchase their old home at fair market value. The new owners, who had bought it unknowingly from Mountain Vista LLC, cooperated fully once they learned the property's history. The Chens settled for a cash payment that allowed them to buy a smaller place closer to their grandchildren. They said they were too old to start over in Alpine Vista, but they attended the first community barbecue under Helen's leadership, smiling for the first time in years. The Torres family moved back into a rental unit while they rebuilt their credit. Their children enrolled in the local school. Their youngest daughter signed up for the winter youth program at Pinecrest Peak. Circle closed. Speaking of Pinecrest Peak, the resort Uncle Ray built from nothing not only survived, it thrived. I used part of the settlement from Andrea's civil liability insurance to upgrade the lodge facilities and expand the youth program that had been Ray's passion. We doubled the number of scholarships for kids from low-income families. We partnered with the county's veteran services to offer free snowboard lessons to former military members struggling with reintegration. I hired a full-time manager so I could focus on my duties as sheriff while still maintaining oversight of the property. And I installed a new sign at the entrance, carved from local pine by a craftsman Helen recommended. Pinecrest Peak, where every kid gets a chance, established in '94. Ray Dawson, founder. Every time I drove past it, I felt him smiling. 1 year after Andrea's arrest, I stood at the top of the main slope, watching a group of teenagers attempt their first real runs. The snow was fresh. The sky was that impossible Colorado blue that makes you believe anything is possible. Christian pulled up beside me on a rental board, slightly out of breath from the climb. "Boss, thought you'd want to know. Andrea's appeal got rejected this morning. Final, she's serving the full sentence." I nodded, watching a 14-year-old girl wipe out spectacularly, then pop back up laughing. "Good. Justice shouldn't have a back door." Christian followed my gaze to the kids below. "You know, when I transferred to Summit County, I thought this would be a quiet posting. Ski patrol incidents, lost hikers, maybe the occasional bar fight." He shook his head. "Never expected to help take down a 12-year criminal conspiracy." I smiled. Mountains are full of surprises. And the girl who had fallen was trying again, more cautious this time, but still determined. She made it halfway down before losing her balance, got up immediately, kept going, the night the appeal was denied. I sat alone in Uncle Ray's cabin, the same cabin Andrea had invaded a year ago with her fake contracts and empty threats. The same cabin where I had mourned him, doubted myself, and ultimately found the strength to fight. His photograph still hung above the mantel. The funeral flowers were long gone, replaced by a small vase of wildflowers I picked from the meadow behind the lodge. The silence was comfortable now, familiar, like sitting with an old friend who doesn't need words. I didn't know if Uncle Ray would have approved of everything I did. He was a gentleman, patient. He probably would have given Andrea more chances than she deserved, but I think he would have understood. Some people don't stop until they're stopped. Some fights can only be won by standing your ground and refusing to back down. He taught me that on the slopes when I was 12. He just didn't know he was teaching me how to survive. The resort wasn't mine, not really. It belonged to the kids who would learn to fall and get back up. It belonged to the families who would make memories in these mountains. It belonged to everyone Uncle Ray had helped for over 30 years of quiet service. I was just the guardian, the protector, the person who made sure his legacy would outlive both of us. I raised my coffee mug toward his photograph. We did it. Uncle Ray, she's gone. The resort is safe. And I'm finally home. The wind answered from outside, rattling the windows gently, almost like applause, almost like approval. I smiled, finished my coffee, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new chances to make a difference. But tonight, there was only peace. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This story was about more than one woman's downfall. It was about what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept that bullies are invincible. Andrea Murphy ruled through fear for 12 years because no one believed they could stop her. It took one person deciding enough was enough to bring the whole system crashing down. If you're facing your own Andrea Murphy, whether it's a corrupt HOA president, a workplace tyrant, or anyone who makes you feel powerless, remember this document everything. Know your rights, and never underestimate the power of patience. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it comes completely. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment telling me what you would have done differently. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about entitled people who picked the wrong target. And remember, mountains don't care about money. They only care if you're brave enough to try. Until next time, stay strong out there.